When you hear the smooth ache of Just Once or feel the sensual pull of Secret Garden, one voice cuts through everything else, warm, textured, undeniably honest. James Ingram. He could break your heart with a whisper and lift your spirit with a single sustained note. Yet for all his Grammy wins, platinum records, and timeless duets, his name rarely sits alongside Lionel Richie or Luther Vandross in the pantheon of legends. Why did an artist who shaped the very soundtrack of love and longing remain so often overlooked? His journey is filled with brilliance, heartbreak, and quiet resilience. If you love uncovering hidden legends like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Legends Underrated. Let's dive into his story right now. James Edward Ingram was born on February 16, 1952, in Akron, Ohio, a city better known for rubber factories and blue-collar grit than for producing world-class singers. Yet, from the beginning, the soundscape of his childhood was more than the hum of machinery. It was the rhythm of gospel choirs, the shouts of preachers on Sunday mornings, and the harmonies floating out of neighborhood porches. His parents weren't entertainers, but they valued faith, family, and discipline. Music came naturally in the Ingram household. James's older brother, Philip Ingram, would later find fame as a member of the R&B group Switch, proving that the family tree carried strong musical roots. James himself was drawn to instruments early. He taught himself piano by ear, fascinated by the way chords could make emotions swell. In church, he quickly became the boy people whispered about. That kid can really sing. The church experience was crucial. It gave James structure and confidence, but more importantly, it taught him how to channel spirit into sound. Gospel wasn't just about hitting notes, it was about moving hearts. That lesson never left him. Growing up in Akron during the 1950s and 1960s meant dealing with both opportunity and limitation. The civil rights movement was shifting the nation's consciousness, and for young black men, music often became a refuge. For James, it was the chance to be heard in a world that didn't always listen. By his teenage years, James was already performing with local bands around Ohio. Friends recall him as quiet off stage but magnetic under the spotlight. He could sit at a piano and turn an ordinary gathering into something holy. One moment he'd belt out a church hymn. The next, he'd slide seamlessly into a soul tune from Ray Charles or Sam Cooke. Yet James's path wasn't guaranteed. The music industry was miles away in New York, Los Angeles, Detroit. Akron was still a small town in comparison, yet James carried a stubborn belief in his own talent. He knew his voice was different. It wasn't the loudest, but it had texture, a husky warmth that wrapped around a listener and refused to let go. Local gigs gave him practice, but also frustration. There were nights when the pay was barely enough for gas money, and the dream of reaching a larger stage seemed distant. Still, those years built resilience. James learned humility by hauling equipment into clubs, learned patience by singing to half-empty rooms, and learned discipline by rehearsing long after others had gone home. More importantly, he learned that his gift wasn't just about personal glory. People responded emotionally to his singing. Strangers would tell him, "Man, you made me feel something tonight." That confirmation mattered more than applause. It was only a matter of time before someone beyond Ohio noticed. But how did this church-trained voice end up catching the ear of one of the most powerful producers in the world? By the late 1970s, James Ingram had sharpened his skills in countless small clubs across Ohio. But local fame wasn't enough. He moved west to Los Angeles, chasing the dream that had fueled so many before him. At first, survival meant taking any gig he could get. He played keyboards for local acts, backed other singers, and hustled just to pay rent. Those years didn't bring instant recognition, but they honed his craft. Opportunity often arrives quietly, and for James, it came through a demo tape. He recorded rough vocals for a songwriter friend who couldn't hit the notes himself. That tape somehow found its way to the legendary Quincy Jones. Quincy, who had an ear for hidden gems, couldn't ignore the texture of James's voice. It wasn't polished, but it was raw, emotional, and deeply human. He wanted to hear more. This connection changed everything. Quincy Jones was assembling a new album, The Dude, in 1981. He took a chance on James, handing him 2 songs, Just Once and 100 Ways. For a young artist who had never fronted a major studio recording, it was like being thrown into the deep end. But James swam beautifully. When Just Once was released, listeners were stunned. His voice carried vulnerability, a man pleading, confessing mistakes in love, yet still clinging to hope. It wasn't the typical bravado of R&B at the time. It was intimacy, almost like reading a personal diary. Radio DJs fell in love with it, and the song climbed the charts. Then came 100 Ways. Delivered in James's smooth yet textured style, the song resonated across demographics. It didn't just make him popular, it made him respected. The track won him a Grammy for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, a remarkable feat for someone virtually unknown the year before. In that moment, James Ingram was no longer just a background player. He was a solo voice the industry had to pay attention to. But if this breakthrough was impressive, what came next would prove he was more than just a one-hit wonder. The success of Just Once and 100 Ways gave James Ingram instant credibility, but it was only the beginning. As the early 1980s unfolded, James's reputation grew quickly. He was in demand not only as a vocalist but also as a collaborator. His voice had a richness that blended effortlessly with others, making him a favorite for duets. One of the first to notice this chemistry was Patti Austin. Together, James and Patti recorded Baby Come to Me, a track that would become one of the most beloved duets of its era. After it was featured on the hit soap opera General Hospital, it was reissued and shot to #1. Suddenly, James and Patti were household names. Their blend of voices, her crystalline clarity with his husky warmth, created something unforgettable. To this day, fans call it one of the greatest duets ever recorded. James also began writing and co-writing, flexing his skills beyond the microphone. Few knew it then, but he was behind some iconic hits, including contributing to Michael Jackson's PYT, Pretty Young Thing. His pen was as powerful as his voice, and this behind-the-scenes work further cemented his place in the industry. Meanwhile, his live performances gained attention. Though James wasn't a flashy showman, his concerts had a different kind of magic. He stood center stage, sometimes with nothing more than a piano, and let the music carry the room. He didn't need gimmicks. Authenticity was his calling card. By the mid-1980s, James Ingram was firmly established as more than Quincy Jones's discovery. He was carving his own identity, a balladeer with depth, a songwriter with range, and a collaborator who elevated everyone around him. The stage was set, but the real explosion was still on the horizon. By the mid-1980s, James Ingram was no longer just an emerging talent. He was a proven voice of his generation. The turning point came when his collaborations began to resonate far beyond the R&B charts. Baby Come to Me with Patti Austin became a cultural phenomenon. The re-release in 1982 sent it skyrocketing to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It wasn't just a hit single, it was a love anthem. For couples of that era, Baby Come to Me became the soundtrack to weddings, first dances, and quiet evenings. But James wasn't done. In 1983, he and Patti reunited for another ballad, How Do You Keep the Music Playing? The song was featured in the film Best Friends. Once again, James delivered a performance that was both tender and powerful. The track earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song and cemented James's status as not just a chart artist, but a voice for cinema. Then, in 1985, James Ingram became part of one of the most historic moments in music history, We Are the World. Written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and produced by Quincy Jones, the charity single united dozens of the world's greatest singers. With legends like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Ray Charles, and Bruce Springsteen all taking turns, James held his own with ease. His solo line soared, a husky plea that stood out even in a sea of powerhouse voices. Many fans to this day single out his moment as one of the song's most memorable highlights. Stories like these are why I Built Legends Underrated, so make sure to subscribe for more untold tales. These performances represented more than chart success. They represented cultural impact. James Ingram's voice was now tied to milestones, a #1 duet that defined romance, a movie ballad nominated for an Oscar, and a global charity single that became an anthem of unity. Yet even at this peak, his name was still too often left out of the conversation when people discussed the great male vocalists of his era. But James wasn't finished surprising the world. If Baby Come to Me and We Are the World proved James Ingram's ability to move hearts, then Secret Garden confirmed his place as a master of sensual storytelling. Released in 1990 on Quincy Jones's star-studded album Back on the Block, The track brought together four powerhouse voices: Barry White, Al B. Shore, El DeBarge, and James Ingram. Each man had a distinctive role, but when James's part arrived, the temperature shifted. His husky tone didn't just sing the lyrics, it caressed them. Fans often say his section took the song home, and decades later, people still point to his delivery as the emotional peak of the record. The late 1980s were also marked by another defining collaboration. Teaming up with Michael McDonald, James recorded Ya Mo Be There, a gospel-infused anthem that earned him a Grammy for Best R&B performance by a duo or group with vocals. The song demonstrated James's ability to blend soul with pop accessibility. By the end of the decade, James had collected 2 Grammy Awards and multiple nominations. Yet despite all this, his name still didn't rise as quickly in conversations about the era's biggest male singers. Lionel Richie was topping pop charts. Luther Vandross was celebrated as the king of love ballads, and Michael Jackson was redefining pop superstardom. James Ingram, meanwhile, continued to deliver classics, but with less fanfare. This disconnect is part of what makes his story bittersweet. He had the hits, the voice, and the credibility, but he didn't chase fame with the same aggressiveness as some of his peers. James was never a tabloid magnet, never one for scandal or flashy headlines. He kept his personal life grounded, focusing on his wife and children rather than the constant glare of the spotlight. While that choice may have limited his visibility, it gave his career a sense of dignity and authenticity that fans deeply respect. That paradox, success without full recognition, is exactly what makes James Ingram the definition of underrated. As the 1990s approached, challenges and struggles were waiting. For James Ingram, the 1980s had been a golden period. Yet as the 1990s arrived, the music industry began shifting in ways that didn't always favor artists like him. R&B was evolving, hip-hop was rising fast, and the industry's attention tilted toward younger, flashier acts. Part of the challenge was his personality. James wasn't a scandal-driven artist. He didn't chase controversy, and he rarely made headlines outside of his music. In an era when tabloids and MTV craved spectacle, James remained private and grounded. He focused on his marriage, a union that lasted over 4 decades, and his children. To fans, this was admirable. To industry executives, it sometimes meant less visibility. Another layer was the way the industry often undervalued artists who thrived on subtlety. James's gift was his ability to convey emotion with restraint. But in a marketplace increasingly crowded with louder performers, his nuanced approach risked being overlooked. The 1990s did bring moments of success. His ballad, I Don't Have the Heart, reached #1 in 1990, proving he still had the ability to command charts. Yet even then, the recognition seemed fleeting. Younger stars quickly crowded the airwaves, and James's contributions risked being overshadowed. But the greatest challenges James Ingram would face weren't just about fading fame, they were with his own health. As the years went on, James Ingram's biggest battles weren't with other singers or the charts, they were with his own health. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, he began to struggle with health issues that quietly pulled him away from the spotlight. That enemy was brain cancer. James, known for his humility and quiet strength, didn't make his illness a public spectacle. He chose dignity and discretion, leaning on his wife, Debbie, and their children for support. When James Ingram passed away on January 29, 2019, at the age of 66, the music world was stunned. Tributes poured in from peers, collaborators, and fans across the globe. Quincy Jones described him as one of the most gifted vocalists he had ever worked with. Patti Austin expressed heartbreak, remembering not just a duet partner but a brother in music. Yet there was also an undercurrent of sadness, not only for the loss of a remarkable artist, but for the sense that James Ingram had never truly received the recognition he deserved while alive. Fans wrote messages online about how his part in Secret Garden gave them chills or how I Don't Have the Heart carried them through heartbreak. Many admitted they hadn't realized he wrote PYT until after his death. In a way, his passing highlighted just how underrated he had been all along. The grief was personal, too. James wasn't just a singer. He was a husband of 44 years, a father, and a grandfather. His devotion to family was one of his defining qualities. The final conflict of his life was fought quietly, without the fanfare of the stage. And when the curtain fell, James Ingram left the world with the same dignity he had lived by, humble, graceful, and true to his values. When the news of James Ingram's passing spread in early 2019, it wasn't just headlines. It was memories flooding back for millions of fans. People didn't simply recall that he had hits. They remembered exactly where they were when they first heard Just Once, the weddings where Baby Come to Me played, or the chills they felt during his solo in We Are the World. That's the true measure of legacy, music that doesn't just chart, but attaches itself to life's most intimate moments. James's catalog is a treasure chest of timeless songs. Just Once became an anthem for anyone who has ever loved imperfectly. 100 Ways taught men how to treat women with care and tenderness. Baby Come to Me turned into a cultural shorthand for romance. Each track wasn't just a song, it was a story delivered through that warm, husky tone that only James possessed. Even decades later, these songs continue to find new audiences. Streaming platforms introduced James to younger generations. His art proved immune to time, transcending generations and genres. Another aspect of his legacy lies in the artists he influenced. Singers who came after him borrowed elements of his delivery. The delicate falsetto, the conversational phrasing, the ability to sound intimate even on a grand stage. He showed that power didn't always mean volume. Sometimes it meant vulnerability. Fans also carried his legacy forward in deeply personal ways. Online tributes often sound more like love letters than casual comments. What makes James Ingram's legacy particularly powerful is how it thrived even without the constant spotlight. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't dominate tabloid culture or flood the airwaves with self-promotion. Instead, his work spoke for itself, quietly embedding itself into the soundtrack of daily life. To fully grasp James Ingram's legacy, you have to compare him with the giants of his era. Marvin Gaye was hailed as the Prince of Motown, Luther Vandross as the King of Romantic Ballads, Lionel Richie as the crossover superstar. Yet when you listen closely, James Ingram's artistry holds its own right alongside them. His voice was as instantly recognizable as Luther's, as emotionally rich as Marvin's, and as versatile as Lionel's. The only difference is that history has not spoken his name as loudly. Part of the answer lies in his humility. Unlike some of his peers, James didn't crave the spotlight or the drama that came with it. He focused on the craft, not the circus. While that may have cost him commercial visibility, it gave his work an authenticity that endures. Beyond his voice, James left an incredible mark as a songwriter. One of his most surprising contributions was co-writing P.Y.T. Pretty Young Thing for Michael Jackson's Thriller album. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time, and P.Y.T. is one of its most beloved tracks. The fact that James had a hand in shaping that history is often overlooked. Other artists frequently cite him as an influence. His phrasing became a template for how to sing ballads with both power and restraint. What's remarkable is how his legacy continues to grow posthumously. After his passing, tributes filled social media, concerts, and award shows. Younger artists covered his songs on YouTube, keeping his memory alive for a generation that wasn't even born when Baby Come to Me first climbed the charts. The rediscovery of his catalog by new listeners shows that true artistry doesn't expire. James Ingram's story is both inspiring and bittersweet. He gave the world timeless music, lived with integrity, and left behind a catalog that still stirs emotion decades later. And though he may not have always been celebrated with the same volume as Marvin, Luther, or Lionel, his influence is undeniable. In truth, James Ingram was never less than their equal. The industry may have underrated him, but history is correcting itself. One fan, one playlist, and one heartfelt memory at a time. When we look back at James Ingram's journey, it feels like opening a time capsule filled with pure emotion. From the pews of an Akron church to the world's biggest stages, he carried the same gift, a voice that could speak directly to the soul. He wasn't about glitz or headlines. He was about honesty, love, and music that mattered. Think of that haunting plea in Just Once, the tenderness of 100 Ways, the timeless romance of Baby Come to Me, or the sensual power he brought to Secret Garden. These songs weren't just hits. They were experiences etched into weddings, heartbreaks, family memories, and moments of quiet reflection. And yet his story also carries a sense of injustice. Despite Grammy wins, Oscar nominations, and unforgettable collaborations, James Ingram's name is too often left out of the conversation when people list the greats. Perhaps it was his humility, his devotion to family, or simply the industry's blindness to subtle brilliance. Whatever the reason, the fact remains. James Ingram was underrated, but underrated does not mean unimportant. If anything, it makes his legacy even more powerful because it lives on through the people who truly felt it. Fans continue to celebrate him, younger artists continue to study him, and his music continues to comfort, inspire, and move us. That is the definition of timeless. This twist shocked the world, and if you never want to miss stories like this, subscribe to Legends Underrated today. So here's the question. When we talk about the greatest voices in music history, the singers who could break your heart and heal it in the same breath, doesn't James Ingram deserve to be right there in the conversation? His name may not always shine the brightest on the marquee, but in the hearts of those who love real music, James Ingram is eternal.